Hi, I'm Nathan Osmond with FluentWorlds. I'm standing here with Mr. FluentWorlds, David Bradford in the house. David, how you doing, brother?
Great to see you, Nathan.
Great to see you.
Yes.
Tell our audience here what we're doing here today.
Well, listen, I'm thrilled to be a part of this association where we're going to talk about how FluentWorlds is changing the world of language training forever. We do it on a smartphone in a 3D virtual world. Imagine 500 million Chinese people learning English, walking through virtual Las Vegas, virtual Central Park, a restaurant, a hotel, etc. It's a great technology.
Thank you, David. You're going to love this message. Check this out.
It's great. Well, thank you for the opportunity of being here. I'm so impressed by the quality of people that are here, the people that I met before we heard the speakers, and then the moving stories that we've heard from the people that express themselves and what they've been through in their lives and how we can grow and overcome. My story, taking the mask off, is when I was 14 years old, I was relegated to my basement in Red Lodge, Montana, a town of 2,000 people. And in that basement, I lived next to the coal stoker. And every morning, every night, I got up and I changed the coal in the coal stoker. We had 7 kids living in a home that had about 1,400 square feet in Red Lodge, Montana. It was a tough upbringing. We lived on church welfare for much of my growing up and so forth. So I'll tell you a little bit about that and then relate it back to where we are today and how we got there. But I finally got to Brigham Young University in 1969 as a freshman at BYU. And I was kind of overwhelmed here. I grew up in this little town. I graduated with 40 kids in my graduating class. It was the biggest town in our county, by the way, and so forth. So it was a small town environment, but I loved it. And I had a mother that was passionate, success-oriented, always told me I could do it. But when I got to BYU and I looked around, 25,000 kids or whatever they had back then, I was overwhelmed by the situation. But somehow, some way, I dug in, said I could do it, etc. And but as I went on through my early career, I went to law school. I finished up in the second class in the BYU New Law School back there in the mid-'70s. And it was a great experience. But when I was graduating from law school, I didn't have a job. I had 3 kids. I'd done super well in law school. But as I looked around me, I realized that it wasn't the people that were the top of the class that were getting all the jobs. It was the people that knew somebody. And I remember going home frustrated and telling my mom, I can't get a job. I can't find a job. What's going on? I'm in the top 20% of my class, et cetera, et cetera. She says, David, don't you remember? I've always told you, it's not what you know, but who you know. Now, that's a phrase we've all heard before, but at that time of my life, I needed to hear it because I'd been so much in my box of academics and just plowing through school because we had no money and finding a way to get out of school and thinking my golden ticket was made when I did well in law school, but it wasn't that way. And so it was that day when you talk about, Darcy asked the question, what kind of changed your life? It was that day when my mom kind of shook me and said, remember that. Now, I've subsequently kind of changed the theme of that over time. It's important to know other people, but it's more important to be interested in other people and what they're doing. So some years ago, I wrote a book called Up Your Game, 6 Timeless Principles for Networking Your Way to the Top. I'm telling you folks, it's who you surround yourself. Chad Lewis wrote a book some years ago about surround yourself with greatness, right? You elevate your own IQ by surrounding yourself with super smart people, super talented people. I always have considered myself in my role as a CEO as the company's CTO, Chief Talent Officer. Not just Chief Technology Officer, but Chief Talent Officer. Finding the great people that can make a difference and change things. So now I'm graduating from law school, and we talk about taking action in life. I remember after 3 job interviews in Los Angeles and 50 resumes being sent out, I had no job. But the elevator now is coming down. I'm on the 10th floor of a high-rise building at the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and La Brea Boulevard in downtown Hollywood. And I'd taken my last job interview. They'd said no to me. Stopped at the 10th floor. I saw a law firm out there. And when you talk about taking action, desperation sometimes causes you to take action. I needed a job. So I saw a law firm and I stepped out. And they said, "What are you here for?" And I says, "Well, I'm here to meet with the hiring partner." And she says, "Well, where are you from?" BYU, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually I went back and I met Jim Waldorf, who hired me at Ersfeld & Younger, a fine law firm in Hollywood, California. I will tell you that the world needs dreamers and the world needs doers, but most of all, the world needs dreamers that do. And folks, the people that we've been hearing from today are people who have dreamt it, but they've also gone out and done it. Some years ago, Nolan Bushnell, the father of video gaming, who's on my advisory board for FluentWorlds, wrote a book called Finding the Next Steve Jobs. And in that book, he talks about, people that need to take action. And he says, everybody who's ever taken a shower has had a great idea. It's the person that gets out of the shower and goes out and does something about it that changes the world. You towel off and you do. You raise your hand, you sit in the front row, you get involved. So let me tell you in my remaining time how I hired Steve Wozniak. Everybody kind of loves that story. But I can't tell you the number of occasions that this has happened to me. So in my 6 principles that I talk about in this book, my first principle is to start your network by thinking first of other people, right? As you're here today, you're going to meet people, et cetera, et cetera. And our first thought when we come to a conference or an event like this is, wow, I'm going to meet somebody today who will maybe fund my company or will do X, Y, Z for me, et cetera. But if you go with the attitude, Brandon, what can I do to help your Forex trading company? Randy, what can I do to help you and your businesses? What can I do with this gentleman to help get his message out, which is fantastic, and congratulations on a great basketball career, etc. Bridger Jensen, I haven't seen Bridger in 30 years plus. And yet the last time I saw Bridger, he's this little boy growing up in the Edgemont 4th Ward.
I was 13 when you last saw me.
Okay, 13. Okay, maybe this tall. You were probably taller than me. But what can I do to help mental gurus? And I'm serious about that. And so forth. So if you take that attitude to give first with no thought of what you're going to get, you're going to be blessed, because there is a law of reciprocity in the universe. When you start getting curious about other people and what they're doing in their life, and you begin asking them questions about what they're doing and how they've succeeded and so forth, there's an intuitive desire for them to start giving back and to start asking you questions. Well, tell me about what you do. So here's I'll tell you the quick version of the Wozniak story. So about 12 years ago, I went to the birth of at the time, my 12th grandchild, Moti Halafuka, and he was born in a hospital in Orem, Utah, the Orem Community Hospital. And I was there, and the doctor who delivered young Moti came out afterwards and says, "David, I've heard about what you do in the community and so forth, and your career in the law and so forth." To fast forward, I had a 25-year career in the law. I became general counsel of Novell, etc. I retired in the year 2000, and then I began running these tech companies. Okay, just to put that in context. So Dr. Judd says to me, "Can I take you to breakfast? I have something I want to pick your brain on." So now there's 13 chain links between that encounter with Dr. Judd and my hiring of Steve Wozniak. So I want you to think through all of the steps that had to happen before I could hire the inventor of the Apple computer to work for me. It was his first paycheck since Apple. Think about that. This iconic man who invented the Apple computer going to work for a little Salt Lake City-based company? How does that happen? Well, I listened to Dr. Judd, and he says, hey, I've got a son-in-law. He needs a job. Can you help him out? I said, sure, Tom. So think about, I agreed to go to breakfast with Tom. Then I agreed to go to lunch with his son-in-law. Then his son-in-law calls me, and he says, this is after our meeting. He joined the Utah Bar Association. I directed him in some different ways. He calls me up and he says, David, can you do me another solid? I'm in charge of the Speakers Bureau for the Utah Bar Association. We're having our Bar Association annual meetings this year up in Sun Valley, Idaho. And I go, isn't that like a far ways away? And I looked it up and eventually found out it was about a 6-hour drive from Provo. But he says, can you come give a speech for an hour up there and so forth? Well, I thought to myself, I'll go and I'll do it, and I'll put my golf clubs in the back. I'll have a nice drive up, stay overnight. So I get a tee time for the next morning at Sun Valley Golf Course. And so I'm excited to go give my speech, but I'm even more excited to go play some golf up in Sun Valley. So I get up there, give my speech. Now I'm walking out of my speech, and I run into a guy in the hallway, and he's asking me some questions about my speech and so forth. And he said, do you know who's the luncheon speaker is today? I says, no. And he pointed down a little white sheet of paper that was sitting on a piano bench. He says, it's Steve Wozniak, the inventor of the Apple computer. Oh my gosh, I've never met Wozniak. I've been in the tech space for a lot of years. That would be really cool to go to that. So here's your next lesson, is sit in the front row when you go to an event. You're going to be there for 2 hours anyway. Get up front, learn something, connect with the speaker, etc. So I sat in the front row. Now, there were 500 people that day at the Wozniak event. But I sat in the front row, and I happened to sit next to a young lady. She had brown hair, but kind of shaped like yours. Chelsea. Did I get that? Ashley. Usually better at names. Ashley. And, I sat down, and I says, hi, my name's David Bradford. Here's another thing, folks. Always be curious. The C word. Be asking questions. Some of you sitting here today think of yourselves as kind of wallflowers, and it's hard for you to get involved and to put yourself out there, etc. But you know what? The simple way to network is to simply learn to ask questions. I asked Ashley a little earlier about what she did in her life. I reconnected with George. I learned about Brandon. I learned about a lot of people today simply through asking questions. That's the simplest way to network, is to simply ask questions. So I turned to this young lady and I said, oh, what are you doing here? She says, my name's Julie Roebuck. I'm Steve Wozniak's executive assistant. 500 people in the room. I happen to sit next to Julie. Fantastic. So we get to chatting. She asked me what I do. Well, I'm in the tech sector. I'm running this company. I'm on the advisory board for that. And she says, oh my gosh, Wozniak would love to talk to you. I go, fantastic. She says, would you mind staying around till he gets done speaking, and I'll introduce you to Steve? And I said, well, that'll be great. But anyway, the point is, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different things had to happen to get me to this point. So after Wozniak's speech, okay, he comes up to me, and or Julie runs me over and says, I want to introduce you to David Bradford. He was an executive at Novell. Wozniak says, oh, did you know Drew Major? Do you know, et cetera, et cetera. We began to play the familiarity game, and trust ensued, and so forth. And so he handed me this card. Now, let's see if anyway, pass that around. I got to get this back. This is Steve Wozniak's business card that he handed me. It's a metal business card. If you want to distinguish yourself, get yourself 500 of those metal business cards. They're very expensive, but People will remember it. You can shave with this freaking thing. It's amazing. Handed me the card. I says, hey, among other things, I'm chairman of the Strategic Advisory Board for Fusion IO. He says, well, what do they do? I says, well, they make a solid state memory device. Oh, I heard about solid state memory. That's really cool stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, we connect, et cetera. I get back to Provo. I follow up with Wozniak. I send him a long letter saying, hey, would love to connect with you, and would you be on our Fusion IO advisory board? He did a background check on me, et cetera, et cetera. Within 24 hours, he got back to me and says, I'd be honored to be on your advisory board. Within 6 months, I'd been made CEO of the company. He was on our advisory board. He says, hey, why don't you be our chief scientist? He says, that'd be great. I'd be honored to do that. And that's when we started paying him his regular salary. So, folks, the smallest things in life can change your entire existence. I made 90% of my income, my wealth, after I was 55. Most of you here are under 55. It can happen at any point in time. Now, I did well at Novell, et cetera, but I'm telling you, you get equity in a company and you make things happen, and great things can happen to you. We're doing it now with FluentWorlds, so I'll just wrap up with FluentWorlds. It's the world's greatest language training company. We are in a valley here that is immersed with people that know languages, et cetera, et cetera. We have created the world's virtual immersion method for language training. So imagine if you're a native Chinese person and you're trying to learn English. Now you can download the FluentWorlds app onto your smartphone in Beijing and walk through virtual Las Vegas, virtual Central Park, even an airport, a restaurant, a hotel, so you learn the language in context. The first word anyone says on how to learn a language is immersion, but not everybody can afford to spend $10,000 to go live for 6 months in another country to learn the language and immerse themselves in it. We do it now on your smartphone. So my wife's a PhD in instructional technology. We love what we're doing at FluentWorlds. Go out and download the app. It's a free download and you can learn more about what we're doing. But listen, think first of other people. Think how you can help them. The law of reciprocity will set in and great things will happen in your life. Thank you very much.